initial idea is almost always wrong. And so as an entrepreneur, you got to have an opinion and you got to have a direction you want to go. But then you have to be open-minded to iterate or pivot to find the even better opportunities. And so most ideas that I see are only 10% better than what's out there. And the vast majority of the time, 10% better isn't enough to get people to change. It's got to be 10 times better.
So welcome to Leading with Relevance. This is a podcast series featuring some of today's most prominent leaders, people who I like to say are busting through the status quo, impacting both companies and community. Our goal is to interview high-level people and find out a little bit more about their personal and professional journeys. We hope you'll pick up some practical insights that you can apply in your own leadership journey. So I'm Tino Mantella, Chief Strategy Officer for Relevance, and I'm loving the opportunity to interview folks like the one we're going to interview today. And you're going to hear about 15 minutes on this podcast, but then we invite you to also pick up on our website. We're calling it Relevance Overtime, kind of like what 60 Minutes does. And you can find the rest of the podcast there. So today I have the pleasure of interviewing David Cummings, but he's a serial entrepreneur. He's an investor in the tech community. He's a landlord. He's a coach. He's definitely an inspirational leader. I think people would say he's now a real estate mogul, and we'll get into that a bit. He's very engaged in the community, and he's been recognized by E&Y's Entrepreneur of the Year in 2019. And one of my favorites, he's the winner of TAG's prestigious Hall of Fame award. So David, welcome to Leading with Relevance.
Thanks, Tino. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to jump in the first question. And I always like to start by asking you about your childhood. What shaped your formative years? And if you could pick one or two key figures that impacted your values and your trajectory.
I just feel very lucky and very blessed that I was able to be exposed to technology at an early age. And then as I grew up, to have more and more opportunities with it. And so I was always inspired by the big names of the 90s, Bill Gates and Michael Dell and names like that. I would read the computer magazines and I would read Inc. magazine for the startup entrepreneur side, and just always trying to, soak up as much information as I could find. And so that's been a big part of it. Just lots of tinkering and lots of reading and experimenting.
During college, you started Hand and Hill. Talk a little bit about that. And I understand a professor gave you like 20 grand to kick it off. How did that all take place?
So he was a German professor, but his area of interest was technology. And so we developed a great relationship. And by the time I got to my junior year, I was ready for, more startup life and a little less college life. And so I went to him and pitched him on an idea that I had 25 years ago. It was a big challenge to update and maintain a website. And so I had been building websites for a few years during the dot-com boom, and the proverbial light bulb went off. Hey, why don't I build software, real software, to make it easy for non-technical people to update and maintain a website? And so that was my first real idea. And so I pitched my professor on the idea, and he said, sounds great. I love it. And so he wrote the check for $20,000, and I was off to the races.
So carrying forward with Hand and Hill, you moved to Atlanta to follow a client here. Is that what brought you here, or were there a bunch of different things?
I was looking for a big city to go to after graduation. Atlanta was always a place that I enjoyed going to growing up in North Florida, because it was, the regional big city. And of course, came through Atlanta many times on flights to different places.
Right.
And so reached out to our largest customer when I graduated and said, hey, what are your thoughts about Atlanta? Is it a good place to build a business? Would you recommend it? What's the business community like? And so they were super gracious and said, hey, come on down. We've got a little extra office space in Buckhead. We're right near Lenox Mall. Lots of young people, lots of great things going on in Atlanta. And I went down, loved it, and I've been here ever since.
Did this part I don't know. Did you sell Hand and Hill before you started Pardot, or was there some gap there?
No, no. So the idea for Pardot came out of Hand and
And
Hill. And so Hand and Hill doing the web content management software, I was heavily involved in the sales and marketing side, trying to grow the business as fast as we could. And so I found a lack of marketing tools that were focused on the business marketer. So most of the tools at the time were focused on the consumer marketer, like a MailChimp or Google Analytics. And so I had the aha moment of, hey, why don't I start a new company to really focus on online lead gen and customer acquisition and email marketing, but really around the business marketer as opposed to the consumer marketer. And so started Pardot inside of the Hannon Hill offices.
you ended up selling, correct me if I'm wrong, in 5 years to, I have exact target slash Salesforce, but
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
for a
And
good
so
amount of money. And was that a big decision for you? How did that all transpire?
yeah, it was one of those things where, if you could wave a magic wand and everything would go right, plenty of learnings along the way and ups and downs. But overall, the general journey was very much up and to the right in terms of growth and timing and the market and the value that the software provided and just really the whole experience. It was phenomenal. So we started it in early 2007 and we sold it in October of 2012.
What was your transition to the next one after that? Did you say, okay, I got to do another one, or you already had, knowing you probably had a couple of things in mind as you were selling that one?
I did. It's with fast growing startups. We never knew how much office space we were going to need. And we didn't want to sign up for a 7 to 10 year lease and get a bunch of space that we might or might not need. And so we played the game of sublease roulette. And so we were constantly bouncing between subleases, and one would be for 12 months and one would be for 18 months. And, when the lease was coming up, we'd always, never know what the quality or the availability was going to be for the next one. And so that experience, led to the idea for the Atlanta Tech Village. And the big idea was, instead of doing subleases, let's get a big building, in this case, 100,000 square feet. Let's put it in a great location, been right near a bunch of restaurants and activities. Let's outfit the whole building. So beautiful space, furniture, fiber internet, snacks, drinks, continuing education, tons of programs. And then instead of doing 7 to 10 year leases, let's just rent everything by the room or by the desk. And let's do it month to month so that the startups can expand or contract as they need and really make it the center of gravity from the startup community. And so we've been at it for 12 years now at the Atlanta Tech Village, and we've helped facilitate thousands, literally thousands of startups in Atlanta that have gone on to produce, 10,000 jobs and raise literally billions of dollars of equity and create $10 billion of enterprise values.
Now is it the fourth largest in the country?
That's right. Yeah, it's the fourth
Yeah.
largest tech center in the country. And, it's been phenomenal. It's been a wonderful experience.
So, it's lessons learned about entrepreneurship and scaling a business. What would be your advice to people just in terms of what you think about scaling? I know one thing you said is start big. I want to
Yes,
talk a little bit about
yes.
that.
Yeah, I've learned a few lessons along the way, a lot of hard knocks. So my first real lesson learned there is that the initial idea is almost always wrong. And
Interesting.
so as an entrepreneur, you got to have an opinion and you got to have a direction you want to go, but then you have to be open-minded to iterate or pivot to find the even better opportunities. And then another big lesson learned is that I would say the number one reason entrepreneurs don't succeed is that the idea that they choose is only incrementally better than what's on the market. And it's really hard to change people's behaviors. And so I'd like to emphasize that the idea has got to be 10 times better than the substitute, the alternative, not 10% better. And so most ideas that I see are only 10% better than what's out there. And the vast majority of the time, 10% better isn't enough to get people to change. It's got to be 10 times better.
You think you see a lot of entrepreneurs, and can you coach them out of that they're more set in their ways? Maybe they come out of a Georgia Tech or something and say, "This is the product. This is what I developed. This is my thing," or are they more flexible than
Sometimes.
that?
Yeah, my favorite entrepreneur archetype to work with is one that has already been a full-time entrepreneur and it did not work out and they want to go do it again. And when they want to go do it again, it's you can tell that they're committed to the craft. They truly want to do it and they're much more open to feedback and ideation and collaborations.
How much of your time is spent on looking at things to invest in? That's the first question. And then, can you pick out, now that you've been a sage leader in this space of both investing and building companies, what companies are going to be successful? Are there like three things you see and say, okay, this company is going to be a go, and this company's probably not going to make?
Yeah, on the tactical level, some of the things that I look for, one is word of mouth. As much as these are all business software companies and you think of virality as something that's more of a consumer thing, businesses at the end of the day are people. And, while you want to sell something to a business, you're really selling to a person at the business. And so, the commonality for the ones that have had the most success are where the customers are effusive, where the customers are the raving fans, where the customers will go out and actively tell their business friends, hey, I'm using this product and I'm getting a ton of value from it and I would recommend it. So I'd say there's a word of mouth component that's really important. A lot of software products are nice to haves. And so when budgets get cut or times get tough, those are the first ones to go. But the products that are mission critical, like you have to have it to run the business, those are the ones that have staying power. And then there's a related category that I'm a big fan of, and being a software product that's in the path of revenue. And so in the path of revenue is a fancy way to say like this product unequivocally helps me make more money. And so things like Pardot are in the path of revenue. And so those are two different categories that I look for. Mission critical, they help run some function of the business in a way that has to be run. And then in the path of revenue, the software, the product helps the business make more money.
Is there any failure you want to point out that was a takeaway for you? Because I personally believe you learn sometimes a lot more by a failure than you do by the successes.
Yes, absolutely. I've had several failures. If people want to buy something, they want to buy it. And if you try to sell them something that isn't good or they don't want it, they're going to vote with their dollars. And so
Right.
I would say just thinking that I knew what the market wanted when I really didn't is my number one challenge. So sometimes it works out and I can adapt it, and sometimes I go off in a direction and it's just too far gone and it doesn't work out.
Was there at one of your companies a significant tech challenge? And how did you overcome that?
So, entrepreneurs and developers today have it way easier than what we had to do 20 years ago. But with that said, there's more complexity around what's expected from a product and, mobile apps and web apps and APIs and cloud services. So, from my perspective, I think it's pretty phenomenal just to see how far technology has come. And then obviously to try to peek around the corners a little bit of, what's AI going to do? What's generative AI going to do? What is AR or VR? Are they going to finally catch on in a meaningful way? A lot of these types of questions are fun to ponder.
What's going to be a game changer? Is it AI, or is it AI is a hot topic, obviously, but is it something else?
Yeah, no, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid on the AI side. I'm a big believer that it's the real deal. And so, the holy grail of AI is going from the storage of the data to the so what from it. And whether that's the text component of it, like taking, Chat GPT and having it write a limerick for you, or it's the analysis side of it, where it's going out and researching things and actually synthesizing data and producing an output that would take a trained human 100 hours to do. The software can do it in 3 minutes. And so I think AI taking the stuff that we have and then synthesizing it and producing new valuable things out of it, I think is a game changer. And so I'm really excited about it.
How would you describe Tech Village in terms of what your vision was, and has it changed in terms of who's in there?
So business model wise, I would say the Tech Village has evolved where it's heavier on the programming and on the continuing education. We always wanted to have a component of the Tech Village to help entrepreneurs, but we started really as the Tech Village for the purposes of solving the office space and the community side. And I would say the evolution of the Tech Village is that it really started to hum as we developed our events and programs and our speaker series and our panels and our recurring events and programs.
So I also described you as a real estate mogul now that you've bought, is it 52 buildings, something like that in downtown. Talk about how that came about, even finding 52 buildings. And then I'd love to hear, your vision on, by the time the World Cup comes around in 26, what that's going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2016, a local developer was looking for the next up and coming area of Atlanta, had seen some success in, the Ponce City Market, Beltline area, and so was looking for a cool historic building or building, just like Ponce City Market turned out to be. And so he found this collection of buildings in South Downtown, and he went out and raised money, basically took over the project and had assembled 86 different properties representing 53 different buildings. And of course, we all know with COVID and work from home and remote work, the demand for office space fell off a cliff. And so all the properties went into foreclosure at the end of 2023. And so come January 2nd of this year, 2024, we were able to buy all the properties out of foreclosure. And so we now have 53 buildings as part of 86 properties, which is most of the private property between, again, Five Points MARTA Station and Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Downtown Atlanta's it's the front door to the whole city.
Right.
50 million people a year go to downtown Atlanta.
Wow.
And so that's everything from sporting events to concerts to huge trade shows to events. We believe that downtown, with its urban grid, its big sidewalks, its great mobility access, there's tons of bike lanes and tons of train stations and just great walkability, that downtown is an area where people are going to want to live. Now it's going to take a huge amount of work. So plenty of entrepreneurs are going to love the glass and steel buildings, just like the Tech Village in Buckhead is a beautiful glass and steel building. But there's a segment of entrepreneurs that want that late 1800s brick 3-story building with tall ceilings and exposed timber and just a totally different vibe. And so we're building out the South Downtown neighborhood in Atlanta to be the largest innovation entrepreneurship district in the country. So taking it from a one building Tech Village in Buckhead to a whole neighborhood, a whole living laboratory. And so it'll be lots of tech villages with different themes. So one building focused on cloud computing, one building focused on robotics, one building focused on video games, one building focused on government software. And so having lots of buildings, and so it ends up looking like a college campus. The aspiration is for South Downtown Atlanta to be that entire campus for entrepreneurship and innovation. By the World Cup, which is a little less than 24 months out, we're going to have renovated 30 of the
Wow.
53 buildings, basically the ones in the core from that 5 Points MARTA walk to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And these are some of the most historic, some of the coolest buildings you've ever seen in Atlanta. And so it's going to be one of the coolest, most unusual experiences in Atlanta, all targeted towards entrepreneurs.
What would you say to companies that are thinking about relocating or building their business, why they should consider Atlanta, why they should consider Georgia?
I would say is the can-do spirit of Atlantans. And it's a little bit like Southern charm. It's a little bit like, people being nice and considerate. But ultimately, for me, it's, people willing to help, people willing to go out of their way to help entrepreneurs, to help
Yeah.
startups, to help businesses. I think it's a friendly attitude, but it's a can-do attitude. People want to do stuff. So people come to Atlanta to further their careers, to make an impact, to get stuff done. And so I would say that Southern charm plus a doer, get stuff done type mentality has been, exceptional for me in my career and recruiting people and building businesses. And so I would characterize it as the can-do attitude of Atlanta.
Some of David's rules are no more than one morning meeting, one night meeting a week, a week's
Hmm.
vacation with family per quarter, date night weekly. So are you sticking to that? That's a pretty bold, ambitious, big, hairy, audacious goal, as they say.
Yes, trying really hard. What I've
Good for
found
you.
is by establishing those, it made it a lot easier to say no. And so, reading lots of books, talking to lots of people, I decided, hey, I'm just going to come up with a system for
Right.
myself and for family and kids and spouse, and have worked really hard to stick to it. Of course, there are some exceptions. It's made it easier for me to say no to a lot more things once I established what my ground rules are.
I like to ask is if you could leave the listeners, and let's say they're entrepreneurs, but however you want to frame it, with one piece of advice regarding relevant leadership, what would it be?
My favorite thing that I would recommend generally is to develop a practice and a rhythm and a structure to become a learning machine. And so the learning machine idea is whether it's podcasts or books or meeting and networking with other people, or it's blogs, or it's tweets, or LinkedIn, or whatever it is, really be intentional about your continuing education. And so, from a leadership point of view, from a expertise, from whatever it is your specialty is, my favorite piece of advice is spend some time, be intentional about becoming a learning machine.
I love that. David, thanks. All the best. I can't wait to get a tour of South Downtown and hopefully can be helpful in some way.
That sounds great. Thanks, Tino.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.